every generation, youth have stood at the front line of change, bold, vocal, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. In Nigeria, from the End SARS movement, End Bad Governance to campus demonstrations and beyond, young people have used protest as a tool to demand justice, accountability, and a better future. But while protesting can be a powerful weapon for social transformation, it can also come with risks, consequences, and ethical questions. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us on another interesting episode. I am Fatima Ahmed Musa, and this is Youth Connect. Now let's go on a short break, and when we return, you get to meet my guest. Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us on Youth Connect, coming to you from our studios here in Abuja. Now, joining me in the studio is Nwafor Obinna Victory. He's a sociologist and a public commentator. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And we have joining me via Zoom Teniola Balogun from Suleja. She's a journalist and a sport enthusiast. Thank you so much, Teni, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
We have Muhammad Bukar Umara, Chief Executive Core Development Hub, joining us from Borno via Zoom as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Bukar.
Thank you so much, Fatima, for having me on the show.
Thank you. Well, we're talking about protest. When you hear the word protest, what comes to your mind first?
Well, I see it as a means to get attention of those in power, to get their attention, to get their undivided attention, actually, to certain issues that concern those that are protesting. It's a tool used in a system, in fact, a human right, I would say, that is employed to get the attention of those in government, to look the way of the citizens and listen to what they have to say and address whatever problem they are presenting.
But do you think that works according to what you just said? Do you think protest works?
Sometimes, yes. I would say to a large extent. If we go down history lane, we're going to find that protest has worked largely. If you look at the Salt March in India by Mahatma Gandhi, of course, it worked. If you look at the Walk of Freedom by Martin Luther King, it worked. If you look at some other, the NSAS, let's bring it down to Nigeria, it worked to a large extent. Look at End Bad Governance, it had an effect also. So yes, it actually works, although it sometimes can be prone to hijacking and all of that, but we can't dismiss the fact that it works.
Muhammad Bukar, let me come to you. Do you agree with what Obinna Victory just said about, protest working and not working? Do you agree with what he just said?
Yes, I very much align with everything he said, because for everything that has advantage, we definitely have also disadvantages. And like he said, across the world, and also if we look back at history, we'll see that some of the biggest changes have happened because of protests that were agitating in seeking for people's rights, as well as seeking for people's basic and fundamental rights as citizens. But I also very, very much agree with the fact that protest is not always the only way for creating change. In fact, sometimes, if not done well, it can even disrupt change. And it might even send out exactly the opposite of what it's intended to do, which is why as young people engage in protest, or as young people seek for ways to be able to engage as well as hold governments accountable, there has to be more strategy that is integrated into that approach rather than just protesting for the sake of protesting. And we've seen very recently how a lot of the protests have been, have been disrupted in ways. They have also disrupted normal life. They have cost a lot of people their lives. And when you want to mention some of the actionable change that has happened or policy changes that have happened because of this protest, sometimes you'll be left with no or very, very little numbers to really count, which means that understanding what exactly young people need before engaging in protest, and also devising a strategy where this protest cannot be hijacked and cannot be metamorphosed into a violence activity is very, very crucial before we engage in any sort of activity that seeks to engage government to create the change that we desire.
All right, Tenny, have you ever been a part of, protest either online or in person? If at all, what was your experience like?
In person, no, but online, yeah, I joined the End Bad Governance, campaign online. I, made tweets, spoke about the problems that we're facing in Nigeria, and I'm not sure how to measure the impact, but there were, lots of young people like me doing the same, and to a large extent, yeah, I think to a large extent, the voices of the youths were heard. So that's it on my end. But physically, no, I have never been a part of any protest physically.
But do you also agree that protest works in terms of, trying to get the attention of the government, just like Victory and Bukar just said? Do you agree with what they said also?
Yeah, I do. Well, peaceful protest anyway. If you look at the article, is it 39 and 40 of the Nigerian Constitution, we have freedom of expression and assembly. So when the democratic processes becomes unresponsive, yes, people have the right to, come out and seek some sort of reform from the government. And yes, peaceful protests have worked in the past. I may not be able to speak much into history, but I was here during the NSAS protest. Unfortunately, there were some hiccups with the NSAS protest, but we also know that to a large extent it worked. The anti-robbery squad was disbanded as a result of the NSAS protest. So yeah, it works, although in recent time, not without hiccups and, violence, but peaceful protest works.
Yeah. I would say I agree with the fact that it works in some ways and it doesn't in some ways, because I've seen when we are protesting and the government are not even doing anything, But why do you think youths are always in the forefront when it comes to protest?
Well, where the status quo affects their future, and especially when the status quo is not a good one. You see, the way life works, our parents went through a lot of challenges to bring us up. So imagine going through those difficulties and then watch your kids also go through those difficulties. You will not be happy. Even the child will not himself or herself will not appreciate that. So when they see their colleagues in other places making progress and having better systems that help their growth and lead them on to the good adulthood they actually want for themselves, they become discontent and they also want the same for themselves. So yes, despite it, they have to resort to it. They don't have any choice.
Other choice. Bukar, what are some of the issues in Nigeria today that you believe is worth protesting for?
Well, I think if you look at Nigeria's socio-economic reality today, you would understand that there is a lot of hardship in the land. The devaluation of Naira, as well as other economic reforms by the present administration, has not been able to yield, immediate positive gains. Even though we are still hopeful that in the long run, some of these reforms would be able to bring about some positive changes, but at the moment, people are feeling the heat. There is a lot of people losing their jobs every day in and out, and a lot of people are not able to meet up to their basic needs, which is something that is really, really troublesome. And if you look at the security situation, which can also be attributed to these socioeconomic realities, there is an exacerbated security problem across Nigeria, especially in major parts of the northwest and the north central. There's lots of kidnapping and banditry activities that are happening, and people no longer feel safe to ply Nigerian high roads, to travel and go and do their daily businesses. So these are very, very critical issues that on normal circumstances, a nation like Nigeria should be able to deal with, because these are the basic and the most or the least that any nation should be able to provide to its citizens: security, which I think is the most crucial aspect of human life. If people do not have basic human security to be able to secure themselves while in their homes or even while going to their works, I think it's really something that causes a lot of fear in people and also disrupts our socio-economic activities. However, I like one of the points that Tenny made around peaceful protest, because they say two wrongs does not make a right. If there is a lot of issues and security issues within the land, it does not mean that we should, especially as young people, breed a fertile ground for more violence, because when you do protest in a riot form, or in a violent form, I think it only creates more chaos and also deepens and widens the gap of socioeconomic dividends for people. Imagine how much money was lost in the most recent and bad governance protests. Imagine how much lives were lost in the NSAS protests. As much as we want to send a message to the government, we want to send a message to the people within the corridors of power, we have to be very, very strategic as young people in engaging the government. There is a lot of civic engagement strategies and approaches that can probably yield more results for us as young people than protests. And some of the disadvantage of the violence protests is that in the end, who suffers the major impact? It is still the masses, it is still the poor people, it is still the young people. Because aftermath of every protest leaves nothing but shattered spirits and lots of vandalized shops and lots of businesses suffering from the major impact of that protest. In the end, is there going to be any sort of compensation from the government by people who lost their properties or their businesses as a result of protests? The answer is very simple. It is a capital no. In fact, some of them might even end up becoming victims of that particular incident by getting arrested because they are either suspects or they are witnesses to some of the things that have happened. So as much as I underscore some of these most critical issues that needs a lot of attention from the government, the most important thing young people as well as civic leaders within the Nigerian advocacy ecosystem need to understand is there is a lot of ways we can do non-violent protest. Where we are today as Nigerians is also as a result of lots of the protests and the labor and the hard work of our forefathers who stood up and protested for our independence, and they fought and they fought. But all of the fights they have done, there was something that was very, very common. It was usually a civil rights movement. Every civil rights movement we have seen across the world, from Martin Luther King to Indian independence protests, but also to the apartheid protests in South Africa. These are some of the major incidents that you can mention of non-violent, social movements across the world that have changed the world today. So we can learn a lot from that. Today we have social media, which is a very powerful tool that we can speak. And as much as people sometimes underrate the power of social media, sometimes it creates more impact than even physical protest. Because one thing about the government is that the government wants to make sure that the information ecosystem is within, as well as is favoring their, their sort of narrative. But when you have this very, very big voice that is saying no to certain injustices and certain activities within the government system, believe me, this is something that can give every government, not just Nigerian or African government, but even the global the global superpowers a sleepless night when everybody is talking about how much there is hardship and how much this can be able to change. And another disadvantage of violent protests is that it also undermines the credible and positive impact of people who are doing non-violent protest. Because in the end, when there is a violent protest, there is a clear message that the youths are, agitated. The youths want probably to oust the government, because we can see in history, when you look at what happened in Nigeria between 1993 and 1999 after the annulment of the June 12th election, these were some of the things that has even led to the ousting of the military government in Nigeria, and which is why every protest is perceived by government as a motive to either overrule the government or to undermine the powers as well as the executive rights of that particular government. So there has to be so much strategy into protesting, there has to be strategy into advocacy, there has to be lobbying. And for the young people who have found themselves within the corridors of power, they should do more than just having their masters, but also being ambassadors of people at the grassroots. Apart from having representatives in the National Assembly, every young person that is occupying a seat within the government's power, whether it is a senior special assistant or just a special assistant or a personal assistant, has a civic responsibility to make sure that they are representing the voices of their communities in the most representative way that that tells people within leadership capacity what they can be able to do to alleviate the poverty as well as alleviate the suffering that people are going through within their communities. But I think these are some ways that we can be able to really engage our government through active civic participation, to also participate in our rights in electionary processes, to understanding our civic rights as young people through budget tracking and being part of every aspect of governance within our community, not just when there is a problem. Because the problem is that most young people only engage with governance and politics when there is a problem. But when things are normal, we do not play our civic rights, and we all have civic rights that we can be able to play to make sure that the government is for us, because we are, of course, are part of the government, since we are the reasons why every elected position is filled. No elected position is filled with no voters.
Okay. Tani, let me ask you this question. Do you think protesting is the most effective way for youth to bring about social change, or, to bring about change generally in Nigeria? Aside from that, what other methods do you think we are missing when it comes to protesting? Because it's not just about coming out on the street and protesting. Do you think that can bring about social change? Tanya, I don't know.
Okay, so protesting is not the only answer, if we're being honest. In fact, protesting is not even enough, because it's not like it's some sort of magic wand that would just change everything. It is just a catalyst, to try to drive positive change. And most often than not, we see protests turn into riots, unfortunately. So your question reminded me of something. I think campaigns rather than protests is the answer. If you remember the Not Too Young to Run campaign, with Yaga Africa, that was what led to the age reduction bill for, the age reduction bill. That's the one that says that gives like a specific age where people can, where young people can go into elective offices. That was a peaceful it was more of a campaign than a protest anyway, and yielded good results. And I think instead of, storming the streets and having, to risk protests turn into riots, we should utilize social media more, just as Umara had said. We could, utilize social media more. We would be protecting lives. We would be protecting properties, and I think more time we should, try to, there are things that are actually legally approved that we do not know. It is okay for youth to go into public offices. I'm not saying storm into public offices, but to try to consult with people in power. For example, the senators representing a particular constituency. I mean, you have the right to go and meet these people to tell them we're demanding something like this from the government. These are things that are legally approved and like within your constitutional rights to do so. So I think if we follow these channels rather than, going all out, even peaceful protest, as peaceful as we may try to make it be, we've seen it happen. Gets hijacked by thugs. You'd see military personnel, in a bid to try to calm everyone down. The protesters would resist, and before you know, everything turns into chaos. So I would say we should utilize social media more. We should consult with those in power more. We should try to, do more of campaigning than protesting. Maybe the word protest doesn't sit right with even people in power.
Yeah. Okay, so
let me interject here.
Yeah.
When Bukar was talking, he mentioned violent protest and all of that. Protest in itself is not violent. Nobody sets out to engage in violent protests. The truth of the matter is that in the history of protests, most of the protests were peaceful. There are sponsored elements that make it violent, that cause disharmony and want to cause discontent, and they are sponsored. Let's come back to Nigeria. Look at the NSAS protest. I was part of it.
Yeah.
Where I was in Enugu. But people in Lagos had a different experience.
Yeah.
Talks were being chattered like sardine, came down from and we are macheting,
yeah.
Peaceful protesters.
Were everywhere, yeah.
So the videos were everywhere. So the talk about violent protest is, I don't see it as something that holds water, because protest is very effective. And let me say this here. Protest is always the last resort. Honestly, protest is always the last resort. Tenny talked about we need to engage more with the people in power and all of that. I saw something yesterday. There's a particular state right now that is going through serious insecurity issues. One of the House of Assembly members has spoken with the governor and wants to raise a motion in the State House of Assembly for the governor to bring the attention of the leadership to tackle the insecurity in that part of the state. The governor said, according to what filtered in, that he should not raise it up so that it doesn't make his government, his administration, look bad. In such cases, what will you do? You're consulted with the governor. Your campaign is not going to read any result because of that statement the governor has made. In such situation, the only thing that would bring the attention of the governor to what is actually going on and force his hand to do what he's supposed to do is where the protest comes in. When people are tired of using the same channels to get to a particular leader and he's not budging, he's not listening, protests will always come out. Now, in the Nigerian context, and I'll be very plain, when you have peaceful protests, any time there is a riot or it gets out of hand,
conflict,
check very well. The people who they're protesting against always have a hand in it. And it's very simple. And we need to come to a point where we should understand that our system in Nigeria doesn't really work the way we talk. People talk about, we have the House of Reps, like Bukar mentioned, House of Reps, the Senate, and all of that. How many people can go to the National Assembly and be granted access to see their representatives, to see their leaders? There is a young man today called Randy Peter, or Peter for Nigeria, on Twitter. He's going around talking about electoral reforms and everything. Before this FCT senator got, paid attention to him, he had to go online and make multiple videos to make sure that the woman sees him. And when people saw that, it was getting out of hand, she had to invite him to her office. Now, we talk about using social media and everything. Agreed, social media is fine. Talking on social media, there's a lot of influence from social media and everything. But do you also know that the people you're talking about and trying to call them to order also have people they sponsor to make sure that they water down whatever thing you're saying? It's happening currently. Currently, it's happening. In fact, it happens all over the place, in the US, in the UK, in Nigeria, in different places.
But what lesson do you think we need to learn from all those protests that we have seen, play out, from the NSAS up to the end bad governance? We've seen how it played out, right? What are the lessons that you think we need to learn, and what is that missing link that we are missing that is always making protests to go violent at every time that we come out to protest?
Sincerity of leadership. That's what is missing. We are in a democratic system. You don't expect everybody to agree what you're doing. You should be ready to listen to voices that are not agreeing with what you're doing. No matter how fantastic you are, you must give room for dissent, for criticism. So We need to start having leaders that listen. We start having leaders that listen. And when there's a criticism about a particular policy, you don't just come and say, they are my political opponents doing whatever. No. You sit down and listen to them. And whatever they say, you pick out what is useful to and to what they call it now, to douse the tension. You don't just you don't keep the deaf ear or play the ignorant game card and then expect everybody to fold their hands and keep looking at you. The NSAS protest would not have happened if the Nigerian government and the police had listened to several ideas and engagement by different youths. Before that, Segalink, for example, has been interfacing with the Nigerian police for a long time. Even the guy that started the NSAS hashtag, Jack, has been going to the police station steady, trying to get justice for people that were unjustly arrested and unjustly punished. The police did not do anything useful with that. They didn't. If they did, what happened in Asaba would not have happened. Honestly, it wouldn't have happened. What happened in Lagos would not have happened. People wouldn't have come out to start protesting. But the leadership has so far, unfortunately, been tone deaf to certain demands the citizens are making.
Thank you so much, Victory, for taking out your time to be on the show.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tenny and Bukar, for also taking out your time to be part of this conversation and for your contributions.
Thank you for having us.
All right, this is where we've come to the end of this episode of Youth Connect on Trust TV. Do not forget to join us again next week for another interesting episode. I am Fatima Ahmed Musa. Do have a lovely day.